This is Joseph Giacobelli. I'm an analyst, investor, author, and the host of the Asia Climate Finance podcast, which is a philanthropic series dedicated to the promotion of knowledge and discussion on sustainable finance in Asia, from the perspective of the business of decarbonization and the energy transition in the region, which consumes about half of the world's energy and electricity. Please support this effort by liking and by subscribing to the podcast. Hello there, and welcome to episode 24 of the Asia Climate Finance podcast. It is the first episode of the series for 2023, and allow me to wish you all a very happy, very healthy, and very safe new year. Today's guest is Johan Tellvik. He is the CEO of ESG Real Estate Laboratory. And we're discussing with Johan about real estate, smart grids, and decarbonization trends in Asia and the rest of the world. Obviously, an extremely topical area, given that Asia has got some of the largest urban centers in the world. Please enjoy the episode and please support my project by liking or subscribing to this podcast. Thank you. Hello, and welcome to episode 24 with Johan Tellvik, and I'm hoping to pronounce Johan's name correctly. Late last year, I had a lot of people with very long, complicated surnames, so I guess yours is a little bit more simple, Johan. But welcome to the Asia Climate Finance podcast. Thank you very much for your time.
Hey, you got that my last name right and my first name too, so it's all good, Joseph. It's great to be here. I'm a big fan of your podcast and love what you're doing at Asia Sustainable Finance Podcast, and I look forward to having a chat.
That's great. So I guess can we start? And by the way, thank you for doing this, because I know you've been unwell for over the New Year period, so I double appreciate the effort. Johan, can you just give us a little bit about your background? You know, what you've been doing and your experience in Asia, etc.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm an engineer by schooling, but like many of my generation, I spent, I guess, most of my life doing work related to finance. So to date, I've been very fortunate to live and experience a wide variety of cultures, societies, and cities. I was born in Sweden, and I spent about a decade and a half in Europe, and then we moved to the US for about a decade, and then the last 2.5 decades I've been in Asia, and that's been an exciting roller coaster journey. And now the last year I've been in Europe. So my work career has had a few defined stages, I would say: financial services and banking in the 90s, and then working as a hedge fund manager from the 2000 onwards. And early on, I was always interested in real estate, both in the public markets and the private investment side. So private, just buying and selling properties. And this has continued to now. And most recently, I've been working with startups in and around real estate. I've had my own consulting firm, and I've also started an education company called ESG Real Estate Laboratory, which is focused 100% on real estate, 100% on sustainability, and 100% on profitability. And what we do there is we offer short-term courses to help educate anyone working in real estate, from lawyers to real estate agents to investors to developers and owners and tenants. And it's really about how sustainability in real estate works, why it's important, and also why we need to make money in order to make it sustainable in the future. And then I'm also an advisor to a few different companies in the space, electric vehicle space and green cement and so forth. So a wide variety of different things I'm doing.
So there's a nice segue, because when we're talking about real estate here, we're talking about sustainability, and there's a very, very important energy component that we will be discussing in more detail in a minute, or energy transition, decarbonization, I should say, component. But first and foremost, I think it would be good if you kind of explained a little bit what you mean by kind of real estate and sustainability, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. I guess maybe I can just talk about decarbonization in a way, or sustainability, or both. So like I said, I'm an engineer, and I've always enjoyed analyzing complex tasks and figuring out better solutions and finding better and new opportunities. And real estate has always fascinated me as one of the largest asset classes out there, and one which we can all understand fairly easily. But it's also one of the most polluting. And real estate, as many of your listeners may or may not know, is responsible for, I think it's about 40% of global greenhouse emissions. And most of that comes from running the buildings or operational emissions. But cement, as one of the most widely used substances on Earth, is also the other culprit. I think that's almost 8 or 9% of the embodied carbon emissions before as we build the building. And I guess, I mean, if I can just say, the good news is that there are a lot of smart companies out there working to solve this decarbonization problem for real estate. From green cement to alternative substances to smart buildings, lots of tech startups focus on construction technology, climate technology, property technology, and you're seeing a lot of great leadership in Asia and in the US and in Europe by the large asset owners, the large developers, and the tenants. So you're essentially seeing a lot of different stakeholders in the real estate ecosystem finding new solutions, new financing opportunities to solve all this. And like I said, real estate being one of the largest greenhouse gas emitters, what really excites me is that we can make everyone if we can just make everyone a few percent more efficient, the net result of that on a global scale on 8 billion people is enormous. And this can be, anything from smart technology, using IoT, Internet of Things, to improve energy efficiency in buildings, or sensors to collect data to control lighting, heating, and cooling. And then on the flip side, we're also seeing, as you know, because your background is energy, there's so many renewable energy options that are coming online that are feeding this and feeding the electricity into the buildings. That's kind of like the micro situation we're looking at. And then millions of commercial buildings, millions of residential homes. And then on the macro front, it's the cities and the big development of the enormous change we're seeing in the world, going from the rural to urban. So it's all kind of culminating in a great kind of race to solve the building.
Right, and that was actually the crux of the discussion today, or the core of the discussion today, which is about smart cities. That's going to be our focus, because actually, when it comes to real estate, like you mentioned, I mean, there's all sorts of different angles that one can take when it comes to decarbonization. So, smart cities is a very nice term, which I think sometimes is not adequately used, and I'm being diplomatic. But can you define, for the purposes of this discussion, what exactly is a smart city?
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a diplomatic comment there, Joseph. Well done. But I think we should look at a definition, I guess maybe from a few different angles. Maybe first we look at the stakeholders involved. So I think there's 4 interconnected groups in a city. So you have the employees, you have the residents, you have the businesses, and then you have academia, all solving for the smart city. Everyone out of those 4 benefits from a smart city. And the goal of a smart city is to make life easier, better for all who lives, visits, or works. So basically, we're solving the highest quality of life and best entrepreneurial climate in a way, right? That's one area. And then what's the driving force? Why are cities doing this? Why, if you're the mayor of a big city, or if you're the city planners, why is this important? And as far as I can tell, it's about, in a global world, it's about competition for human capital and for energy decarbonization. So with globalization, people have a choice where they live and work. You and I can work anywhere, and most people here on this call can leave tomorrow and work in a different city. And with things like Airbnb, it's pretty easy to work anywhere, basically. And the other thing is that just like buildings account for 40% of global CO2 emissions, cities account for even more, because they're about 70% of global CO2 emissions from energy use. So as these things evolve over time, if we don't solve it now, we're going to have bigger problems in the future. And so I think most cities would like to be able to say that they're innovative, they cater to new technologies, new ideas, they create and they add to people's well-being. Then they're open, so gender equality, fair laws, that kind of stuff. And then the connectivity. So innovation helps us in connectivity, and connectivity is about IT infrastructure, but also connectivity for people to meet and engage in topics, right? And before I get to there's one more piece before I define it, and I think it's the global urbanization we're seeing in the world. So I think most cities realized maybe 10, 20 years ago that the city they lived in the past, or even the city we live in today, is going to be 10, 20, 30, 100% larger than what it is today. And so how are you going to cope? And I think the UN, the statistic I've seen recently is that 55% of all of human beings live in cities today. And this is going to increase to 68% by 2050. And on 8 billion people, that difference of an extra 10% is a lot of people, right? So to me, coming back to the definition here, a smart city is a city that I think utilizes digitalization and new technology to simplify and improve the life of its residents, visitors, and businesses. So it's kind of like you take an old process and you make it more efficient, and that can be anything, right? And the goal is to offer the city the highest quality of life and best environment for business. That's kind of what I think is a smart city.
Yeah, and I think it's something that sometimes is not well understood. I mean, especially in Asia, you've got small urban centers like Tokyo with 36, 37 million people, or Jakarta and Shanghai with 25, 26 million people. And apart from Japan, which has got obviously negative growth in terms of population, but I think if I remember the number correctly, Jakarta is looking at the population of Jakarta should be increasing over the next 10 years, between 2023 and 2035, from 25 million to 35 million or something. And it's the same thing is being replicated in, whatever, Vietnam, China, and other places as well. So the population growth is actually quite key. But so you've defined smart cities. You've explained why it's kind of important to focus on that. You kind of alluded to what makes a city a smart city. Can we dig into that concept, Johan, and talk a little bit more about some case studies, some real world examples, and then after that, we'll move on to how to actually make money out of it. Where's the finance aspect? But that'll be the second part of the conversation. So could we start with some perhaps like case studies to explain what can be done and what has been done and what can be done?
Yeah, and I think as we look at case studies, I think it's important to realize that there's been a lot of effort and interest and development over this. I mean, forever basically. I mean, that's a long term, but even when cities in the 1800s started using the subway systems in London and New York, and we replaced the horse and carriage, there was technological evolution. So it's an ongoing process, but obviously we're going faster and quicker, and the urbanization is going quicker. And I think also it's important to keep in mind that there's four major forces at play too over the last few decades. It's the digitalization of all asset classes, right? And new technologies. You have the urbanization, what we've spoken about. You have globalization, what we've spoken about. But you also have increased life expectancy. So not only are you getting more people into cities, they live longer, which means as we all live longer, we're going to consume more services over a longer period of time. And add in urbanization and everybody gravitating towards city, it just means that cities have to figure out how are we going to cut our carbon footprint? Because it's not like they want to stand still and say like, well, we're going to have the same footprint. They want to have a lower footprint, right? So energy efficiency is a big aspect of this. And I think infrastructure is key there. And where you're seeing a lot of leadership in infrastructure, especially in Asia, is transportation, where we need options to commuting and buses, trains, active choices like bikes, e-bikes, walking, and so forth, and all of that. But if you look at the big urban sprawls of Shanghai and Tokyo and Hong Kong and Singapore, one thing they've done an amazing job at is just their subway systems. And I think the statistic is in Hong Kong, out of 7-8 million people that live there, I think it's 7.3, whatever the number is, 5 million take the MTR every day, right? It's just an enormous accomplishment. It's the same thing in Singapore. A majority of the people take the subway system or the mass transportation system. And it's funny, like I've told you earlier, I'm staying here in Stockholm for a little bit, and guess what? Guess who runs the Stockholm subway system now? It's the MTR from Hong Kong. And it's kind of like, when you do something so well, you can export that technology and benefit from that and help other societies. The other aspect that we're seeing leadership, I think, is just utilities, and that includes electricity, the grid itself, EVs. There are different pockets of EV growth in Asia. I would say Europe is further ahead there, but as that evolves, China obviously is one of the leaders globally. But as that evolves, it's going to become important on utilities. And then the other aspect where we're seeing leadership is the public services. And that goes for everything, basically providing support, facilitating everyday life, like schools, permits, elder care, taxes, online services. And in my world, and how we all think, is like less queues, less travel to do mundane things mean we can sit at home or in a cafe rather than travel, which in itself is just not a good use of our time, right? And I think the cities that are going to succeed obviously are incorporating a lot of this, going back to technology here, in fiber and 5G networks. And again, the big cities, centers like Tokyo and Hong Kong and Taipei and Seoul and all the technological leaders, they're all basically investing a lot of money there. So it's kind of funny going back to kind of like the smart cities and some real case studies, right? It's if you look at a lot of the rankings, Singapore is actually one of the prominent leaders globally as a smart city, and I think it's just because of their DNA. They've never been like a giant economy by themselves, but they're a smart economy, and they've built themselves on the idea of sustainability and innovation. Mobility has been important in the infrastructure and transportation system. So it's basically use all their technological know-how and ideas to become smart in a lot of different things. So I think in 2016 they installed. I know this because I love this kind of waste management stuff. But they installed solar-powered rubbish bins, and they have fill level sensors inside there, and then compactors, and basically it gives them a multiple of traditional waste management bins. And similar to Seoul, I think has done that, and I think the statistic I saw was that they cut their waste collection cost by over 70%. In Seoul. So, there's just an amazing amount of innovation that happens in this space. And the problem with it is maybe that a lot of it's you living in Asia and I living in Asia, we all know there's 600 million Southeast Asians. Singapore is maybe 6. So it's great that Singapore is a leader, but that means 594 million others may not be leaders yet. So we're kind of waiting on cities like Jakarta, like you said, which is an enormous sprawl of people. And they've started. They started it with data governance, AI, remote work, digital management, and so forth. But it's going to take time. It's a lot easier to do 6 million that's kind of been streamlined to do this for the last 30 years, as opposed to just taking something like Jakarta, which is more developing, to get to the same level, right?
Yeah, true. If we were to like break down the various components of smart cities contribution to decarbonization, obviously you mentioned transport, and we can talk in great detail about transport, but could we talk a little bit first about real world case studies or examples when it comes to buildings? Obviously it is the traditional obvious thing, which is you have double glazed or triple glazed windows, and you have LED lighting and all of that basic stuff for energy efficiency. But is there some kind of good example or good blueprint that some of Asia's major cities can look at? And I guess I'm talking especially about retrofitting buildings, because I think if you're building a new building, we've got some great brand new office buildings in Hong Kong or Singapore, which are world standards or global leaders in terms of energy efficiency. But the retrofitting is a lot more difficult, right? So do you have any specific kind of case studies or good examples of that?
Well, what we've seen, there's been a few buildings that I've seen lately that are, and they're kind of retrofitted, like you said. And there was one, I forget the name. There was in Australia. There's been one in Stockholm that I visited a few weeks ago. And all the one thing they had in common was that as they did the retrofit, instead of tearing the entire building down, I think the one in Australia kept 95% of the core of the building intact. So what that means is that when the cement was produced and the carbon was released in the embodied carbon stage of things, as you retrofitted, you didn't have that new complete overdose of CO2 coming into the atmosphere again. So that was one way. And then the other thing is they also in Stockholm, what they did was they made sure that the internal fittings were reused, and then a lot of the old furniture was having given away to schools or given away to people that needed them. So it was a complete package of saying like, okay, well, we have a building, it's full of stuff. How do we make sure that whatever we have in there, we can try to recycle, reuse, and redo? And I think that's the future of how. I don't think there's a one shoe fits all, and it might be different for different landlords and owners, but overall, the more we can do that, I think the better off we will be, right?
That's great. And so that's when it comes to buildings, right? And we talked about the retrofitting, etc. What about other things that smart cities are doing? Can we talk a little bit perhaps about the transport side of things, and how you see electric vehicles and in some countries electric bikes, although in some places like Hong Kong or Jakarta or Bangkok, you probably don't want to ride a bike because you're going to get killed. But can we talk a little bit about electric vehicles and how you see that developing and that interaction with the smart city?
Yeah, I mean, if the assumption is that we're going to start with a city, let's say it's 1 million or 2 million or 3 million or 10 million, whatever the city size is, and then it's going to double in the next 10 to 20 years, or go up by 50%. If you're a city planner, I guess what you're solving for is okay, how can we make sure that people actually use the car less, right? And use mass transportation more, because that seems to be the easiest one. So the subway system is great, right? But then there are other things like the electric vehicles, like you said. It's still a luxury in a way, because you're still consuming. You creating that car. There is a global footprint of CO2 in the battery and so forth, but it's less, obviously. I think EVs are a great sign. What we're seeing is more EV grids. I mean, the problem with the EV grid globally is that it feels like it's the 1990s internet, where people are just building EV grids without planning, and that's where people get in trouble, right? But I think for cities, it's easier for them to kind of say like, okay, well, we need, I think the common metric is like you need 10 cars per per one EV charger, right?
Mm.
And so as we convert, we have to think about what happens when everybody needs an EV charger, and where are we going to put them, and who has access to them, and so forth. And then I think the other thing too is like you said, in congested cities like Hong Kong, where the infrastructure doesn't allow for biking or e-bikes, it might be tougher to commute. But at the same time, what we've seen in Europe, where Copenhagen is pretty, it's still kind of tight. But what they've done is basically, okay, cars have one lane, then the bus has one lane, then walkers, pedestrians have their lane, and then the bikes have one lane. So it's kind of like you've created cities with you've taken away two lanes or three lanes for cars and just made it one. And by default, that forces people to do other means because it becomes too slow not to, right? So I think e-bikes is an exciting avenue, not only because you can have e-cargo bikes, you can have smart buses to transport people intra-city, but also if you're UPS or FedEx, clearly you're going to want to have efficient, smaller modules to transport goods in and out of the city. And by default, all those things help reduce the transportation footprint. And I think that's important because, if we can convert more of the city to be green and accessible to people with parks, I think people are going to want to enjoy it more and stay there more and work more and be happier more overall.
Great. In terms of your kind of work, and I do know that you work with quite a few startups, and I'm sure you go through quite a lot of different opportunities, so to speak, when it comes to startup companies. Could you, within the bound of confidentiality, could you kind of share some startup examples directly and indirectly related to smart cities?
Sure. I mean, one of the companies we work with, they've worked a lot with smart cities over the past 10 years, I'd say, and it can be anything as simple as having sensors for lights, so that you have a smart lighting system in the city. So when a person walks through a particular part of that town at night, the LED light turns on. So there's less chance of crime or attacks and so forth, or just, it's just nice to be able to have some light so you can see where you're going as opposed to pitch dark in the middle of the night, right? So it's things like that. And then other part is just working on how to make, have smart sensors. So on parking systems, so we know where all the different systems that are being utilized, so you can figure out, okay, I'm going to park here, and I can get there in 5 minutes, and just having that as a monitor, and things like that, and then also working with EVs, electric vehicle system integrators, and one of the things we're solving there, and we didn't speak about this, but in Europe and in most countries, trucks are as big of a polluter as all cars on the road. So it's just fascinating to work with that. But there's so many different angles and opportunities within technology. And another one here that we're working on for smart cities is green cement, where a company that we're working with out of Germany, think they have found a solution to make the cement very low CO2 emitting, almost zero. And that in turn is an enormous accomplishment if they can actually do it.
And with some of these companies that you're working with, is there a scope for them to kind of find business or opportunities in Asia?
Oh, for sure. The green cement company, for example, they're talking. I mean, if you look at cement, the Vietnam happens to be, and Thailand are two of the top cement producers on earth, as is Indonesia. So there's lots of scope for any kind of green cement production, collaboration. And to me, it's a bit like, okay, well, how many auto manufacturers are there? There's a lot. And And the same thing goes for the cement. There might be a few big ones on the top, but there's tons of different solutions, and it's just a matter of creating different niches and different solutions. I don't think the way we do cement today is going to go away anytime soon, but with time, it might be different mixes in the cement that helps us create a better solution.
I was also thinking about some of the kind of smart cities related challenges. And I guess one is with data privacy, right? And what I mean by that is the more information you have about people's behavior, what people want, the better you can kind of set up your digital network, your smart network to cater for those wants and those needs. But then by the same token, there's a data privacy issue. How much personal information do you want to release? So how do you see this whole kind of, is data privacy a major hurdle to convert cities to smart cities? And what can we say about that in the Asia context?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few different and interconnected hurdles. I mean, data privacy clearly is one of them, but one of them is just the legacy of the city itself. It's easier if you start from a blank slate, like Jakarta. They're moving the capital of Indonesia to Borneo, and that's a clean slate. So, as opposed to upgrading antiquated infrastructure like New York and London. So I think newer cities, which by default are found in the Middle East and Asia, have a distinct advantage in this regard. So with legacy, right? And then you have, I guess, lack of, I guess the word is interoperability in a way, because you have various systems from different sectors in the city, and to create a cohesive network. So I think it's pretty complex if you think about it. There might be competing entities in the private sector, or there might be different OS on the back end. And you and I both come from a banking background, and we know that everything looks fine on the front end, but you might have a Unix server from the 1980s running something in the background, and it just takes time to get new technology in. I think funding is a hurdle too. But on the data side, I would agree. There's probably been a few projects that have fallen apart because technology basically lacks the ability to integrate data from different systems, or there's different data standards, and then also, like you said, the data privacy is pretty paramount, and we all as human beings get a little bit nervous with Big Brother watching and knowing everything. So I think cities and countries are going to have to rethink and focus on everything from the funding to the people and the technology. So how do we protect citizens and provide assurance over security and privacy and fairness? There's going to be conflicts of interest, and how do we look at monitoring and evaluating and communication of what we're seeing with regards to people. So I think it's a tough question, but it's fair, and it's something that people are, I don't think anybody has come to have come up with a good answer yet, but data privacy is looming, and it's what people are most concerned about, I would say. But it's not the biggest. Maybe it's not the biggest hurdle, but it's definitely one of the top 2 or 3.
And I think it's really interesting because there's obviously attitudes where in some countries, e.g., I would guess China, the average Chinese citizen is a little bit less concerned about that because they want all the benefits from providing personal data, and we know that from apps like WeChat, where basically you can do everything on earth with that particular app. And then you've got other extremes of some countries where they believe that even the government or a company knowing where you are is highly sensitive information, so you don't want to release it. And then there's everything in between. But I guess we're gonna that hurdle will be resolved sooner or later.
Yeah, no, I just want to add to that. I think it's interesting how people are. We're all kind of we all have these biases internally, right? That says, okay, this is good, this is bad, this is advantage, this is disadvantage. And like you said, different countries have different rules and regulations, and I would say most countries are okay with their governments doing. Like in Sweden, for example, everybody uses local e-commerce system, so there's very little cash in the system, so everything is tracked, credit cards or payment systems, and so you can even go to the church and give to the church through an app, and so to me that's, somebody knows what you're doing with your money, which is fine, but other people may say like, but then there's concern when if the system is run by a non-Swedish entity, then people get a little bit more concerned. And that's how people are, right? We're very local in our thinking in a way that our government is okay, but somebody else's government is not okay. But it's the same thing to me in a way, right?
If I can move on to kind of the last portion of our discussion, Johan, which is money, finance.
Yeah.
How are smart cities, financed? I mean, it's like you were saying, sometimes the planning is lacking, whether you're talking about EV infrastructure or other areas. So you've got some corporates doing one thing, other corporates doing another, and then the governments, local governments going in a different direction. So who exactly, finances the various elements of a smart city?
Yeah, so I think there are a few factors that make financing smart cities challenging, right? One is just the size of the project. I mean, these are not $1 million, $2 million entities. Typically, it's people are spending billions here. And one obstacle, or a few obstacles before we even get to who's financing is the technology risk itself, because you might be the first to deploy a particular technology, and so the investors or the governments may not be so inclined to use that until they see another proof of concept, or there's a risk with that, as we all know. And then there's the return, right? So a project that may actually be very positive for the society or having a positive socioeconomic impact, but there's just no way to assign a dollar figure to the benefit, or there's no way to say like, okay, well, the return on investment of this will be X because we know that in 5 years we're going to make money, or in most cases it's uncertain. We may never make money on this, so who's going to pay for it, and so forth. So, and that goes for fiber optic cables and all sorts of things, right? That are the infrastructure at the bottom of this. So I think the financing is creatively created around a few different things. So there's probably three different areas. So one is debt financing, and that could be bonds or export credit, and it could be Asia Development Bank or EXIM or all sorts of entities like that. Then there's the financing, more traditional. That could be alternative lender from the private sectors, infrastructure funds. And then there's more, I would say, funding. So the difference between finance and funding obviously is you don't expect to get paid back, but like governments and grants. So I would say right now, a lot of this is falling on the funding side. But as technology and the private equity and the venture capital groups continue to focus on this area, we're seeing more money funneled into the financing aspects of things. And then it's kind of like so what then it's more like that's how they're financed, and then it's kind of like how are you going to make money on all that. So then it becomes interesting to look at all the different solutions of how you make money, or the structures of making money.
And what are the kind of like business models for private enterprises to generate returns out of the smart cities investments?
Yes, I mean what we're seeing is there's a lot of JVs that are being formed, or long-term leases, build operate systems, partnerships. There's even privatization depending on the country. Different countries have, some countries, in Scandinavia, a lot of the solutions may be state owned, but then the technology itself is privately owned. So it really depends on the city and the country, I think. And the same thing goes for Asia. I mean, I would say Asia is pretty flexible, depending on what country you're in.
Mm-mm-mm-mm. And amongst the startups that you've been working with, I think there was one e-bike company or something, and some other ones. How do, in a nutshell, how do these guys make money?
Yeah, no, and for them to get scale, it's about joint venturing, right? They're looking for partners, and I think it's a twofold product. One is they're looking for a local partner to help them establish a foothold where they want to be, but then they also look for companies that have partnerships or at least relationship with governments to help, bridge that divide. Because in the end, all of this, the cities are humans, and the people are solving for the smart cities are humans, and the people are making the decisions to how to solve this smart city is typically human. So we haven't been replaced yet by AI. So we need people to connect.
So when a private company decides to embark in a smart city related project, say EV charging or providing technology to some smart building or whatever it is that they're doing, typically speaking, what you're saying is that they really need scale. So it's not so much how much investment goes in at the beginning, but it's the key is really them getting scale before they can get some significant return, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, I'm not sure what you've seen past COVID, but it seems after COVID, business takes longer. So sales cycles are longer. And one thing we have to realize too here is that we're dealing with government entities here, right? And by default, most government entities have a lot of legal hurdles to check through to make sure there's compliance, there's no anti-graft, or there's fairness of trade and all sorts of things. So any government related contract is going to take time, and a lot of startups just don't have that time. So there's it's an interesting kind of puzzle we're trying to solve here, because we don't have time as humans to solve carbonization, the decarbonization of buildings and smart cities, but it's going to take time to get there. And the other thing is that it's all good that we say like, oh, well, look at Helsinki and Copenhagen and Zurich, they're great, or Singapore, but they're small cities. They're like you said, there's Jakarta, there's tons of cities in Shanghai and Beijing, and there's cities in Africa. So we don't know yet what the problem is going to be. But as as the middle class in the world gets bigger, we're certainly going to have to fix this problem quicker. And that I think is one of the major hurdles too.
Got it. That's great, Johan. Do you have some kind of A, final thoughts, and B, can you crystal gaze a little bit on the outlook for opportunities for investors in smart cities in Asia in the coming years?
Yeah, I mean, look, I love technology, and I'm a big fan of and big believer that the future is greater than the past. And I think we're fixing all sorts of things, from air quality to buildings and construction to clean energy to an inclusive and equitable society where people can be who they are, sustainable finance, transportation, and urban planning. So there's so many things we're fixing in buildings and smart cities. And I think the technology that goes in is one of the trends we're going to see in 2023 and 2024 is there's going to probably be a lot of consolidation, because I think there's more than 10,000 different technology solutions for just property alone. And typically you see waves of consolidation. One area we haven't seen much in is the construction technology area. And we're starting to see a lot of effort and money put into that sector now. So I would think there's going to be loads of opportunities, like you said earlier, within retrofitting, and within new energy and within just construction technology.
Got it. And I mean, if you were to kind of talk to, I don't know, a family office, a private equity firm that plans to invest in smart city related activities in Asia, which kind of countries or cities would you be recommending to such an entity?
That's a tough question. I haven't thought about that, but I would say obviously you're going to have leadership out of the established centers like Singapore and even Hong Kong or Taipei or Seoul. You think of Korea and the enormous IT infrastructure they have behind them with all the likes of Samsung or even the cars themselves, right? Or Tokyo and Japan, right? So there's that. But then you would think too, maybe it's the cities that are not there yet. Think of Surabaya in Java, or think of Chiang Mai in Thailand. There could be greater opportunities in smaller centers that are not there yet because they haven't gone down the rabbit hole as far as everybody else. And I would think maybe that's the exciting bit to evaluate there.
And finally, what area of kind of the whole smart city picture would you be most focused on as far as Asia is concerned? Would it be, I don't know, EV or e-bike management systems or building controls, or which area do you think has got the most opportunities?
Well, I sense that the evolution of electric vehicles and e-bikes and e-buses and e-vans and that whole ecosystem does provide a lot because it provides valuation increases for the building itself. It makes the building more connected, and it allows for people to transport themselves in a more ecological manner over time. So I would think that a lot of these cities that we just talked about, that's what you want to look at, and that's probably a big opportunity in the years ahead.
That's really, really great, Johan. Well, I really, again, appreciate your time, and especially because you haven't been 100% over the last few days. So I double appreciate the effort. And I really want to thank you for participating in the Asia Climate Finance podcast. And I wish you, of course, a very happy 2023. May it be healthy and safe.
Yes, indeed. I hope everybody has a great and happy, healthy, and joyous 2023. And no, I appreciate you having me on, Joseph. I enjoy speaking with you always, and you're one of the thought leaders in this space. So it's great to be on here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope you did enjoy this episode of the Asia Climate Finance podcast. I would really appreciate any feedback, topic ideas, etc. My contact is in the show notes. Thank you.